Where does life begin? And where does it end?
I'm going to start listening to the whispers of my soul.
Or is there only life? A continuous expansion into the unknown.
I'm going to start paying attention to those things that feed me.
Was our travel through the birth canal, in its own way, a death?
We're able to embrace that next phase of the journey.
And our entry into this world, a new life.
We are so distracted from our inner knowingness.
Perhaps we are in a birth canal right now, only dreaming, imagining, playing with ideas.
We're able to connect with the divine. We're able to drop into the eternal sense of us.
Is it that the veils are thinning, or I'm simply remembering and waking up?
Welcome. You have entered the realm of 1111 Talk Radio. Your host is SIMRAN. It's time to discover your own language with the universe. Empower yourself, broaden your mind, open your heart, and discover who you are. Now, here's your host, SIMRAN.
Today's conversation is about the mystery, eternity, death, and your big, fat, juicy life. I moved about a year ago, and at that time it was just after my father passed. And when spring came, I decided that I wanted to landscape the yard. Don't have much of a green thumb, but I decided to landscape around the house because there really wasn't anything there. Dad was a professor of botany. He taught for 33 years, and he loved plants. I would say that he probably loved plants more than he loved his kids. Usually in the wintertime, all the blankets in the house would end up on top of the plants instead of us. So I kind of think that he really did adore his plants, his children. And so as I'm planting and I'm placing mulch and I'm going around the house and I'm edging with stones and I'm really talking to him and I'm thinking about him, he was not very verbal for the last several months before he passed. And yet there was this deep connection to him in my meditations that continued after he passed. And as I'm moving around the house, placing everything, I'm talking to him and I'm saying, Dad, you would never believe that me over here with the green thumb planting the plants and the flowers, and I would just love to see your smile, hear your thoughts, and I hope you're doing okay. And then all of a sudden I said, you know what, Dad? If you're here, if you're around, I want you to send me a bird. Because this new place I had moved to, for some reason, there were no birds. I had been in this place for 6-8 months, and not a single chirp, not one tweet, not any feathers, no birds. And I couldn't understand, where are all the birds? Especially since I came from a place where I had tons of beautiful birds all the time. And I said, send me a bird, because my bird feeders had been out for 6 months. And then I thought, don't just send me any bird. Send me a bright yellow bird. Well, I went to bed that night very proud of what I had accomplished because it was quite a feat for me. And I woke up the next morning and I hear the singing. There's this amazing chirping going on, and I thought, oh my goodness, there's a bird. And I went downstairs and I walked onto my porch, and there was a bright yellow bird sitting atop the bird feeders, singing its little heart out. And I said, hey, Dad, thanks for coming. The veils are thin, or maybe we're all just more awake. That's the conversation today, to understand that there is an eternity, that there is something after death, and that we don't have to be afraid of it. My guest today is Stephanie James, and she's a respected therapist, filmmaker, and the host of Igniting the Spark podcast. She weaves a tapestry of wisdom that is at once deeply personal and at the same time universally relatable. She's a psychotherapist, and she has written the book, Your Big Fat Juicy Life and Everything After. Through it, she illuminates how we perceive life, death, and the magnificent spectrum of human experience. This is a jubilant invitation to all of us to wake up, to breathe deeply, and to dance with the mysteries of existence, knowing that our souls will continue beyond this 3D experience. I've had her on before. She's also the author of Becoming Fierce and the producer of the documentary When Sparks Ignite, currently featured on Humanity Stream Plus. Welcome back, Stephanie. It's so wonderful to have you here.
Oh, thank you, Simran, so much. So wonderful to be here with you.
I loved so many of your stories throughout this book and how it consistently opens the eyes and the heart to this understanding that death is something that we have been conditioned into believing, something that it's not. I want to start off by having people understand what you mean by a big, fat, juicy life.
When I talk about your big, fat, juicy life, and I hold that in my heart as a concept, what I really feel that is it's not just about having just the joy or just the good things in life. It's embracing all of it. It's embracing whatever emotions show up for us, whatever experiences show up for us, and not labeling them as good or bad, but really being with them in a place where we can breathe through what shows up moment by moment by moment. Part of what makes our life big, fat, and juicy is when we can let go of the fear or the clinginess we have, where we say, oh my gosh, death is the ending, and we better get everything done right away in this life because this is the only chance we have. When we really realize that death is just the next chapter in our book of eternity, we can start letting go of that fear. We can start befriending death. Then what that does, Simran, is it moves us into a sacred relationship with the present moment. And that's what makes our life so juicy.
It's been written by many that our greatest fear is that fear of death, that we are, I guess, so afraid of the beyond. What do you think, both as a psychotherapist as well as a spiritualist, this real fear of death stems from?
It's interesting because in other cultures, it's not as feared as much as I feel like it is here in America. There are other cultures, and I write about that in the book, where death is a celebration. Even if you think about the Mexican culture and Dia de los Muertos, where it's really a celebration of the dead and really a belief that the dead come back during those days of celebration. So that, as you said earlier, the veil is very thin. As a psychotherapist, I've seen it over and over again. People are not just afraid of death, they're afraid of living. When we start, as I said, befriending that concept of death and start talking about it, I think that's a piece of this. When we come into conversation and no longer treat death as this taboo subject, and somehow if we speak about it, we're inviting it in, instead to say, okay, I'm willing to talk and explore and go into this other realm that is so unknown. And, we have these brains that love predictability. They love things that are familiar. And so death as an abstract concept can really bring sometimes that fear for people. So the more we talk about them, then the more that they're normalized. 73% of people that are polled have had these kind of experiences like that you just shared about with your father, where they do have a sign from beyond. I've had those experiences my entire life where I was very aware that this 3D world wasn't all that there is. And as I mentioned in the book, one of my greatest teachers was when my daughter was 4 years old, my daughter Acacia. Acacia is the Greek word for immortality. It's the tree of life in Africa. And when I named my daughter Acacia, I had no idea that she would be my teacher. So when she was 4 years old, I was in the bathtub taking a bath. I was a single mom at the time, and the phone rang, and little Acacia brought in the portaphone, and I'm talking in the bathtub to my mother. And what my mother was sharing with me was that my 46-year-old aunt, Gwen, who had been struggling with breast cancer for years, had just gone in that morning for exploratory surgery. And when they had opened her up that morning, my mother shared with me they had found that the cancer had spread throughout her entire torso. And all they could do was to sew her back up and let us know that she probably had only about 3 months to live. And so as I hung up the phone and started crying, little Acacia wandered back into the bathroom and sat on the side of the tub. And she said, "What's wrong, Mama?" And I said, "Oh, honey, Mama just doesn't want anyone to ever die." And she looks at me and she says, "But Mama, we never die." And then I said to her, "Oh, honey, I know we go to heaven." Now, even though she and I didn't go to church and we didn't speak of heaven, I thought, well, surely that's what she must be talking about. And she looked at me again and shook her little head and said, "Mama, there's no heaven. When I was a light up in the sky with God," and then she paused and she said, "Do you remember your other mother, Dorothy?" And I was like, oh my gosh, my other mother, Dorothy, that was my grandmother who died when I was 13 years old. My grandfather had remarried the next year. And so Acacia had never known Dorothy. Out of respect for Seal, Grandma Seal is what we called her, we never spoke of my grandmother. We didn't have pictures of my grandmother up. And so here it was 12 years later. And Acacia says, "Yes, your other mother, Dorothy, her light was in the sky with my light, and God put some of her light with my light, and I got to come down and be your daughter."
To have that literal a conversation come out of such a young child and describe it so succinctly, such a beautiful experience of not only interconnection and eternity, but also that whole idea of soul contracts and rebirth and how we come in to heal and to guide and to have the wisdom brought forward, and particularly through our children. What did that awaken you to?
That I could let go of the fear. I'd already had experiences from a very young age of seeing what I would call light beings that were standing at my door. Night after night, they would stand at my bedroom door. And ironically, 6 years later, Acacia, when she was 10, had the same experience when she was staying at my mother's house of seeing these same light beings. I knew that our souls continued on, but I think I was still afraid of death until that moment. And somehow, in that deep knowingness that so deeply resonated with my soul, I was able to just let go and breathe more deeply and say, oh my gosh, what a gift that we have in this life. And what else can we create when we're not consumed with that fear? When we can let go and really treasure and savor the moments that we have together.
I feel like we create these beliefs and ideas and guards and barriers to life, to love, to experience, simply because of that predictability that you said the brain loves, or the routines and habits that we rely on because we keep seeing that taking place in the world. Talk a little bit about overcoming the fear of life rather than focusing so much on the fear of death.
Yes, yes. Such a beautiful question because I really do feel that oftentimes it's not our big ego that is our limited expression in the world. It's much more our small self that is like, who am I to create and who am I to shine in this world? When you pair that small ego self with the fear of death, it's almost as if people sometimes are like holding their breath. It's like, I just want to stay safe. And so, what does that look like? And so, people oftentimes shut down or they become very small in order to create that safety within them. And they're not living the expanded version of themselves or living through that purpose or many purposes I think we have of coming to this world. Part of my work with a lot of people is helping them break through limiting beliefs, childhood wounds that have come kind of the lens that they're experiencing the world through. So we can heal some of those deeper wounds. As an EMDR therapist and trauma specialist, we work on how do you restructure trauma in the brain again, so you're clearing off that lens, and it really does, it repatterns neural pathways. So the traumatic memory is no longer connected to the physiological response. how beautiful that is to start opening up those pathways for people so they can start stepping into this fuller version of themselves. Sometimes what's gotten in the way of us really embracing our fullest selves is we've compromised ourselves so much. As Don Miguel Ruiz says in his Four Agreements, we've domesticated ourselves and our wild nature so that we fit in or we can people please and we're acceptable to our parents or teachers, whatever that was. Part of this is really a discovery process for so many people that I work with of what is it that really speaks to your soul? What lights you up? Where do you find pleasure? Where do you find joy? And really moving into the senses of just saying, oh, I'm actually a person who I want to walk in nature daily. I want to experience what I call sky time and just soak that up because that is what feeds my soul. Or this is a craft or a hobby or something I've always wanted to do, or this is volunteer work. It's so interesting to me how sometimes it takes something serious happening before we hear about people opening up to what they really wanted to do or who they really wanted to be. My work and the things that are so important to me, Simran, are helping people to develop that within them without having to go through the crisis, without having to go through the traumatic experience, which opens that up oftentimes naturally for us. So to learn how to befriend those inner parts of ourselves and just begin listening.
We are those that thrive on the routines and habits and knowing what's ahead. And flowers, plants, nature, the seasons constantly show us that there's not an end, that there's a continuous cyclical way of growing through, going dormant, and then becoming alive again. Why don't we latch on to that as opposed to, oh, the flower dropped from the plant? That's
Yes.
death. That's the end of the plant.
Yes, thank you. We are so distracted from our inner knowingness because I think when we are able to drop into that place, that we're able to connect with the divine and we're able to drop into the eternal sense of us. For me, that is that eternal spark within each one of us that cannot be extinguished, that continues on. And when we're in touch with that, then the rest of this falls away. And unfortunately, so much of the time, we distract ourselves with TV or our iPhones or social media. And so we can really distract ourselves from our own lives. So there is power in the pause, just to drop into ourselves so that we can start knowing that part of ourselves more deeply. You know, that connection to the divine is the connection to the eternal. There really is power in the pause. And I invite people putting alarms on their phone at random times during the day and using those as these small little portals to come back into relationship with that spark within us. Really, the idea for me came from Thich Nhat Hanh in Plum Village, where randomly throughout the day, these bells would ring and everyone would stop and take 3 conscious breaths, returning to themselves in the present moment. We have access to the divine and to the sacred when we are in the present moment and not distracted from it. So that's the blessing in an exercise like that, to help bring us back to this breath, this moment, what's happening right here, and then tuning into the divine that is always present in this moment.
In the book, you write about the God spark, the idea that there is something that radiates within us that is eternal. And that is critical in that pause that you talk about. How do you suggest individuals keep that remembrance going?
A daily practice. We learn through repetition. We had to pay a lot of attention when we were little kiddos, when we were learning how to tie our shoes. We'd have to really concentrate on making those bunny ears and looping them around. And pretty soon, we never thought of it again. So it's not that you practice and you'll never think of it again, but it becomes something that you become more and more and more familiar with. Our brain thrives on familiarity. So allow the present moment to be that access point, and your growing familiarity with dropping into your divine self. And that can be as easy as your breath. There's a beautiful breath technique where you breathe in through your nose and you breathe out slowly, all the breath through pursed lips. And you continue to do that. And what that does, Simran, for us, part of accessing this and accessing the divine within us is to get out of our busy, busy minds. So it's taking the pause. And that's why I love the thing about the alarms is being able to break our habitual patterns of thought.
I invite you to pick up Stephanie's book. Allow yourself to weave through the pages, to tap in, to gain from the wisdom that is shared. And, if inspired, go to the Maitri-Soul Collective in Santa Fe, September 19th to 21st. You can find out more at stephaniejames.world. And while you're there, pick up her other book as well, Becoming Fierce. Once again, this was Stephanie James, respected therapist, filmmaker, and host of Igniting the Spark podcast. If you're not following her on social media, find her. If you haven't signed up for her newsletter, be sure to do so. Join my Substack. My publication is Beyond the Illusion, and you can find it at iamsimran1111.substack.com. That link is in the bio description. You'll actually receive all of the 1111 magazine issues on audio as part of that, in addition to the weekly prompt, inquiry, contemplation, and meditation that I provide to all of the subscribers on the annual membership. That link is in the bio description.
You are listening to 1111 Talk Radio. SIMRAN is an award-winning author, publisher of 1111 Magazine, powerful speaker of wisdom, and a life mentor. Find out more at iamsimran.com. Now, back to 1111 Talk Radio.
I really enjoy working individually with people. If you're looking for some additional support and guidance, and you really want to dive into the subtle, then there are quite a few options on my website at iamsimran.com that have to do with shadow work or manifestation if you want a more focused approach on a particular thing, as well as individual sessions around deciphering signs, symbols, and synchronicities, gaining a better understanding of how the universe is speaking to you, your particular dialect. That link is in the bio description. So fast forward 1 year. My mother passed just a few weeks ago. It's really interesting when both your parents pass. It kind of feels like you've become an orphan, and yet at the same time, you know the bigger picture. You know about eternity. You know that the soul never dies. You know that they're always around you. But there's a longing to connect with them even from that realm. And the beautiful thing is we're moving into a time of higher dimensions being accessible. So after her cremation, I came home and I sat on my porch, and of course, the bright yellow bird showed up, and I said, "Dad, I know you've been waiting for Mom. Let me know you've got her. If you do, could you come back with another yellow bird so that I know that she's with you?" I left that alone, and the next morning, I came out on my porch with my cup of tea, and there on top of my bird feeders were 2 bright yellow birds. You can ask for the signs, you can connect to the communication, and more importantly, you can believe in eternity. My guest today is Stephanie the Spark, Stephanie James, and she has written a beautiful book called Your Big Fat Juicy Life and Everything After. So if you're needing a shot of belief, if you're wanting to step into a world where things are possible, if you are a little distraught at what you're seeing in the world today, if you want to be more alive, then I suggest picking up this book. You can find out more at stephaniejames.world, and while you're there, go ahead and register for the Maitri-Soul Collective in Santa Fe, September 19th to 21st, so that you can have an evolution revolution and step into your gifts and wisdom, along with greater self-realization and personal power. Welcome back, Stephanie.
I remember when I had Bruce Lipton on the show, and he said, we think 80% of the thoughts today that we thought yesterday. So change can be very slow if we're not intentional. And so we help move into knowingness, into knowing that spark of ourselves more deeply by carving out that time for it to be more of a practice. I love the concept of bookends to our days. The bookends are first thing when you wake up in the morning and last thing before you go to sleep. What I'm doing is I'm letting go of all the busyness. I'm letting go of the to-do list when I wake up. And I'm taking that time to go into my meditation room and light a candle and do that breath work. My personal practice is going into the different energy centers, the chakras of my body, and breathing into that place. And as we do that, we can start to feel that aliveness and that tingling that truly is that essence that is lit up and alive within each and every one of our cells. We're not breathing ourselves. We can take a conscious breath, but we don't consciously have to think about breathing our breath or beating our own heart. So we know something more powerful, this divine source is doing it for us. It's the same, I think, also when we have a cut or a wound. We don't have to look at that wound and say over and over again, please heal, please heal, please heal. There's a divine intelligence, a knowingness that heals it for us. We are constantly in a state of moving towards healing, even if it doesn't feel comfortable, even if it's not showing up in a way that we like. Oftentimes, our growth edge is very rarely comfy.
What does it mean to make peace with death?
I think one of the important pieces of that is that we're not clinging. We're not clinging to this life. When we make peace with death, then we have let go of the fear and we're able to embrace that next phase of the journey for each one of us. Part of what you were just sharing right now, we can have these beautiful, peaceful practices as you did with your mother and father passing and asking for those signs. I believe those kind of things can really help us make peace with death because they become proof. They become this beautiful knowingness that spark that is each one of us, it continues on. When my father passed, and right away, the signs started showing up. We had so many things in our home electronically just start going on the fritz. With a brand new stove, all of a sudden the digital clock would be a totally different time. All of a sudden the date would be different and no electricity had gone out. It was just shifting. The dishwasher would turn on, lights would flicker. The biggest one being I would get into my car and the electric seat would be pushed all the way back. And I would say to my partner, did you drive my car today? And he'd said, no, of course not. I have my own car. Those signs actually can be a part of that knowingness. You and I have a mutual friend, Suzanne Giesman. She had said exactly what you were just speaking of, that you can ask for a sign. You can ask for that knowingness to be revealed to you. And it was such a beautiful reminder because the more comfortable we get with it, the more peace we bring to the process.
I love the line in your book where you write, what would your life look like if you sucked out all the marrow? And I think that individuals maybe don't know how to then fully embrace that part of themselves that might want to let go of who they are or move into a different phase of life or move somewhere else or do something different. I think that that too is part of the experience. What are your thoughts?
As we begin to go into this journey of knowing our inner selves and that spark, that divine spark within us we've been talking about, that spark really shows up and can give us incredible guidance. I call it my inner GPS. As you know, it just happened for me 5 months ago. I was literally in the middle of a therapy session and the voice said, you're moving to Santa Fe. Now, I lived in Fort Collins, Colorado at that moment. I lived 6 blocks from my mother and stepfather. I lived right next door to my cousin and his 2 children, he and his wife. And both my daughters and my grandsons all lived about 20 minutes away. So to get that calling and to listen to that divine calling was so powerful for me. And it had happened one time before, only once before in my life, 32 years prior. And without going into the story, when I listened to that at the time, being a single mother, and it was about a move. It was the only other time in my life I've been told to move. It ended up saving me so much because where I was working shut down. I would have just signed a new lease and been a single mom, no job, without the ability to instead come to Fort Collins, where I was called to come back to and to thrive and to have a job right away and not be laid off like all my girlfriends were 3 weeks later after I had arrived in Fort Collins. So I feel like part of generating that peace and part of us really touching into the sacredness of our lives is to be able to listen to that inner GPS. And as Oprah Winfrey says, oftentimes it speaks to us in whispers. It might show up in dreams. You might have a sense of knowingness, or you start seeing something over and over again, maybe a sign or an animal or some kind of messaging. And she says, if you don't listen, it's going to speak louder and then louder still. And if you still ignore it, eventually it's a brick to the head, which is when we have an accident or maybe an illness that finally begins to wake us up. And so I do think part of our juicy life, not just hear that inner guidance, but to follow it. Our intuition really will tell us, oh, yeah, I think you should take that class. Or it says, maybe hold off for a while. Or yeah, start walking, go to the park, do this activity. I mean, it really is a guide for us in all moments of our lives. When I step into my knowingness, when I listen to my intuition and I step into these different things, I feel like my soul is being fed. I feel more alive. I feel that juiciness in life more than ever before.
Taking those leaps and stepping out of what feels so logical to find that joy and to also immerse in that juice. And I would imagine you walk a really fine line between the knowledge and intellect of the psychotherapist that says, feel every feeling and open to what's hidden, and that spiritualist that says, be the spark, rise above the illusion. How do you navigate making certain that the humanity part of us is well attended to, keeping that place in mind of this divine eternal part?
There's really a beautiful interweave of these two things. I remember when psychology and science and spirituality really started merging together about 15 years ago, and how exciting and expansive that was for me, and to bring to my clients. I think that it's so important because we really do live in this duality, and we don't want to just do a spiritual bypass. We don't want to be like, oh, everything's roses and everything's, supposed to just be this good feeling. I think we've chosen to incarnate here at this particular time and to have this human experience. And so part of being a human is really messy. One of the ways that those two parts interweave is to really, as I said, hold what comes up. Because as human beings, we do get caught sometimes and we don't show up perfectly. And so it can look like anxiety or fear or jealousy. It can come in all these different ways. And to honor that as our human experience, it's actually an opportunity when those, what we might call our shadow emotions, come up. And I think this is really how I interweave it, whether I'm doing transformational coaching or whether I'm doing psychotherapy. It's looking at those places as portals to a deeper knowingness. oftentimes in somatic work, let's say someone is dealing with, we'll say, sorrow or loss or grief. I invite them to come into their body where that emotion is living in that moment. Interestingly, so often, it's not only that that becomes a portal to deeper knowing of themselves, or maybe where that wound is generated from, like in childhood. Oftentimes, for an individual, becomes a portal into the divine. It becomes a portal into the infinity and a larger sense of connection with something larger than themselves. But it's not about not going into the feeling. And I can't emphasize that enough. It's really being able to breathe through the uncomfortableness and follow the wisdom of that emotion through our bodies, through our experience. When that has been released, when it comes to this, it does this beautiful kind of natural release. If we'll stay with it, then that creates room for the infinite, for the divine to come into us. We can start experiencing that expansiveness from that place. We can't just bypass and go to the expansiveness. I mean, we can, but then we miss the true healing. That to me, Simran, is the beautiful divine interweave of these two modalities, that they really are beautifully matched because we are in duality. That's the beauty of it. So it's not to ignore our humanness. What a beautiful school we're in. What an interesting trip. What if instead we learned how to embrace that part of ourselves and treated that part of ourselves as if we would a wounded little child, and held that part and entered into conversation and listened to the wisdom of that small self. And oftentimes what I invite people to do, Simran, through that portal is to bring in a sense, not only of their adult self nurturing that child, but of their higher self or divine self coming in. And almost as if through a hologram of energy merging with that younger self, to really be with it and hold it so that it feels seen and held and heard. And through that beingness, what eventually starts to happen is there's a lightness in the being. There's a lightness within as it's witnessed and it's heard and it's held. And then that can come forward once that process has happened. And it's so gorgeous to watch. I mean, to me, it's one of the biggest honors of my life is to get to witness other people's healing.
I don't know that people look at their movement through their emotions, their movement through their pain, their movement through the different portals, as you call them, that come their way as also spiritual experience. And I do believe there is an interweaving. Why wouldn't that be the infinity that we are moving in and out of these portals to experience from both sides? You've also written a book a few years ago called Becoming Fierce, and it makes me wonder how these two interweave. Is one the human having the spiritual experience and the other the spiritual having the human experience?
Yeah, that's so beautiful, Simran. Thank you. As you say that, I just feel the resonance with that so much. I really feel like that's true, that as I wrote Becoming Fierce, even though I feel like my books are definitely so much download, that book took me 9 months to write. In March, a year ago, I was interviewing Neil Donald Walsh for my podcast. And he's, for people that don't know, the listeners that don't know, he wrote the Conversation with God series. And it has just been a, phenomenal spiritual influencer in our lifetime. And as we got on that call, we could not get to the interview. And we kept just talking, having this beautiful personal deep dive. And at one point, he just stops the conversation and looks at me and he says, Stephanie, you're going to write your next book and you're going to start tomorrow morning. And this book's going to have a global impact and I'm going to endorse this book. He said the original title he felt like was going to be, I'm dying to tell you about death. And it was only because, publicists were like, I don't know right now. Things are so crazy if people want another book about death. And the ironic part that my agent had said too is this isn't a book about death. This is a book about life. And when she said that to me, I said, well, and it just came to me. I said, well, then the name should be Your Big Fat Juicy Life and Everything After, because that's really what it's about. I mentioned this story because to step into writing this book that's so much about my spiritual experience at the depth that I speak of it for the first time and that deep, deep knowingness of the eternal, I was scared to death when I first started. I did show up that next day, and this book downloaded through me in under 6 weeks. And as you know from reading the book, during that time, these incredible people started showing up to be in the book with me. As a part of this, Wayne Dyer's daughter, Sage Dyer, and after my interview with her, she said, "You've got to meet my mom." And so Marceline was in the book as well. And Stephen Simon, the Academy Award winner of What Dreams May Come with Robin Williams and Cuba Gooding Jr. What started happening was this incredible spiritual experience where it was like, okay, people might that have only known me as a psychotherapist think this is nuts. And I really I had to get over that moment of anxiety of like, oh my gosh. And then ironically, I had so many clients start opening up about their experiences of experiencing the eternal. People are so afraid of this conversation because, they don't want to be marginalized. They don't want people to think they're crazy. And so they don't speak of it. And yet it's such a common experience. Again, when we start having these conversations, we can open up to that beautiful interweaving that is this experience, that is the psychological blended beautifully with the spiritual, that envelops and holds both experiences, that duality within us.
What was the growth that came from the first book, or the insight, and what was the major growth and insight that came from the second?
My biggest growth through becoming fierce was actually telling some of those stories that I hadn't told, which were really about owning our voice, our own experiences. For me, it was really around the painful relationship with my father and learning how to detach with love. Both these books have been amazing, also healing processes for me. And so to be able to share Becoming Fierce and then to do the Becoming Fierce workshop that we filmed a couple of years ago and are now working on a 6-part film series, I really felt that it was my soul's inner calling to step into that, to allow my voice to be heard in these ways and to step into speaking more of that divine alignment that I'd experienced.
Well, thank you for being such an incredible model and example of following your calling, expressing your gifts, and being willing to live your own big, fat, juicy life. Your Big Fat Juicy Life and Everything After is filled with beautiful stories from Stephanie's own experiences. It also has the wisdom from many luminaries as part of that added component. And she has sections inside where she helps you to tap in. Remember Acacia? Write down your earliest memories of times you had this knowing like Acacia. Some wisdom beyond your years or something you experienced as a child that could not be explained by your logical world. Then take time to review the spiritual experiences you had around death as a child. What messages about death have you carried with you? What has informed your beliefs around death? And then, breathe into the happiest memory you have of yourself as a child. See yourself playing, laughing, rolling in the grass, doing whatever you most love to do. That precious child is still alive inside of you. And when you're in touch with this part of yourself, you can go beyond social constructs and cultural conditions to access the eternal element of your soul. This creates a deeper sense of well-being and connectedness to something that goes beyond our daily life experience. This is one example of tapping in within the book, Your Big Fat Juicy Life and Everything After. Again, this is Stephanie James, a respected therapist, filmmaker, and host of Igniting the Spark podcast. I invite you to go to her website and also find out about her other book, Becoming Fierce, and her documentary, When Sparks Ignite. And if you want to be in person with her, she is hosting the Matrix Soul Collective in Santa Fe with a variety of New Thought leaders, September 19th to 21st. If you are ready for an evolution revolution to step into your gifts and wisdom, you want to be a part of the Matrix Soul Collective. Go to stephaniejames.world. That link is in the bio description. If you're looking for some additional support and guidance, and you really want to dive into the subtle, then there are quite a few options on my website at IamSimran.com that have to do with shadow work or manifestation if you want a more focused approach on a particular thing, as well as individual sessions around deciphering signs, symbols, and synchronicities, gaining a better understanding of how the universe is speaking to you, your particular dialect. That link is in the bio description. Thank you so much for spending time. Until next week, I am Simran, in love, of love, with love, and as love. Be well.
Thank you for opening your mind to a new reality, your heart to greater compassion, and your experience of aliveness with 1111 Talk Radio. Join host Simran next Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern Time to step through the gateway of conscious living. You are not on the journey. You are the journey.